She walked straight up to my lake cabin, stared me in the eye, and told me her son deserved this place more than I did. Then she calmly informed me that the HOA had more than enough power to make my life miserable until I finally agreed to sell. What she didn't realize was that I'd already spent the previous 3 weeks uncovering something worth far more than the cabin itself. It was the kind of discovery that could shut the doors on her little empire for good. But before we get into that, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your country down in the comments right now. I read every single one, and it still amazes me how these stories reach people all over the world. Seriously, let me know where you're tuning in from. My name is Damon, and 18 months ago, I inherited a lake cabin from my Uncle Gerald. Uncle Gerald wasn't the type of man who asked anyone for permission. In 1987, he built that cabin with his own 2 hands on the shore of Crescent Lake and spent the next 35 years living exactly how he wanted. He answered to nobody. When he passed away, he left me the cabin along with one handwritten note. It simply said, "Don't let them push you around." At the time, I had no idea who they were. 6 days after moving in, I found out. Her name was Patricia Holloway, president of the Crescent Lake HOA. She carried herself like someone who had gone through life without ever hearing the word no. She arrived at my front door wearing a blazer, carrying a clipboard, and smiling in a way that never quite reached her eyes. She handed me a 14-page welcome packet and informed me that I had 30 days to bring my property into full compliance. According to her, my dock exceeded the approved width by 2 inches. The shutters were painted the wrong shade of blue. Even my porch light had somehow become a safety concern. I thanked her politely, closed the door, and immediately searched whether any of those violations were actually enforceable. Most of them weren't. But Patricia wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, she returned. This time, she brought her son, Brandon. Brandon was 31 years old, unemployed, and carried himself with the confidence of a man convinced the world owed him the very best. He stood at the edge of my porch, admired the lake view, and said, without the slightest bit of embarrassment, "This is exactly the kind of property I've been looking for." Patricia smiled beside him and casually mentioned that the HOA had been discussing the possibility of reclassifying my parcel as a community recreational zone. She explained that there were options available for residents who struggled to maintain compliance. Then she offered what she described as a very fair buyout. It was 40% below market value. Take a second to think about what had just happened. She wasn't inspecting my property. She was trying to acquire it for her son. I told her I wasn't interested. She said I'd eventually change my mind. That was the moment I started paying close attention to everything happening around me. And this is where the story takes a turn. I hired a property surveyor, not because I believed I had a problem, but because Uncle Gerald had always insisted that the land surrounding Crescent Lake held more history than most people realized. The surveyor, a quiet and detail-oriented woman named Cecile, spent 2 full days walking the boundaries of the property. Late on the second afternoon, she called me over to a cluster of pine trees near the western edge of the community and pointed to something unusual on her map. The HOA headquarters, a small building where Patricia hosted meetings, stored records, and parked her golf cart, was sitting on land that had never actually been deeded to the HOA. The parcel had originally been part of a shared access strip granted to several landowners back in 1979. One of those landowners had been my Uncle Gerald, which meant part of that strip had legally passed me. Cecile looked up on the map and said, "You may have a legitimate claim here." For nearly 30 seconds, I couldn't say a word. I just stared at that little building. Then I contacted a real estate attorney named Victor, someone who specialized in old property disputes exactly like this one. Victor pulled the original plat maps, traced the chain of title, and confirmed every detail Cecile had uncovered. For decades, the HOA had been using that access strip informally without ever formalizing the easement. Nobody had challenged it. Nobody had taken the time to look closely. Until now, Victor laid out 2 possible paths forward. I could file a quiet title action and begin a legal process that would change everything. Victor told me the first option meant a lengthy court battle that could drag on for months. Then, very carefully, he explained the second option. Since I was legally a co-owner of that parcel, I had every right to install a boundary fence along my portion of the access strip. It was completely legal, fully within my rights, and it would effectively block the only vehicle access to the HOA office building. I told Victor I'd think about it. I thought about it for exactly 4 days. That's how long it took Patricia to slap my property with 3 more completely bogus violations, including one claiming that my bird feeder qualified as an unauthorized structure. I called the fencing company that Thursday. They started work the following Monday. Now picture this. It's 7:45 in the morning. Patricia Holloway is driving her golf cart toward the HOA office for the monthly board meeting. She's got coffee in one hand, a clipboard resting on her lap, and she's expecting another routine day of telling everyone else how to live. Then she turns a corner and freezes. A brand new wooden fence stretches directly across the access road leading to the HOA office. Professionally built, legally posted, installed exactly where it had every right to be. Attached to it was a small laminated notice from my attorney explaining the ownership dispute and the restriction of access rights. Patricia sat there in that golf cart for a very long time. I watched the entire thing from my front porch. The phone call started within the hour. Patricia called me first. Then her attorney called Victor. Then 3 members of the HOA board showed up at my property line and asked if all of this was really necessary. I told them I was simply exercising my property rights the same way the HOA had been exercising theirs for years. That's when things became genuinely interesting. As Patricia's attorney began gathering documents to challenge the fence, he uncovered something even Patricia didn't know. The HOA itself had been operating without a properly renewed charter for the previous 4 years. The original filing had expired. Every fine they had issued, every violation notice they had mailed out, every forced compliance demand they had pushed onto residents, including the campaign of pressure directed at me. All of it had been issued by an organization that technically had no legal standing to enforce any of it. Before long, the county got involved. Then a local investigative reporter received a tip, I'll let you guess from whom, and start asking questions about the HOA's finances and whether residents' dues had been handled appropriately. Within 6 weeks, the Crescent Lake HOA voted to dissolve itself. 3 months later, Patricia Holloway moved out of the neighborhood altogether. As for Brandon, the last I heard, he was renting an apartment about 40 minutes away and still hadn't found the lakefront property he believed should have been his. The fence is still standing. I haven't decided whether I'm ever going to take it down. Victor says I don't have to, and Uncle Gerald's handwritten note still hangs on my refrigerator. Don't let them push you around. I think he knew exactly what he was leaving me. Not just the cabin, not just the land. He left me enough rope to let arrogant people unravel themselves through their own greed and entitlement. And the view from my porch is still perfect. Actually, it's even better now that the constant noise and drama are gone. If you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA, a neighbor who acted like your property belonged to them, or someone who confused authority with ownership, share your story in the comments. I genuinely want to hear it. And if you're new to HOA Revenge Stories, don't forget to subscribe, because the stories on this channel only get wilder from here. Before you go, tell me where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next one.